Welcome back, second graders. Today we're going to continue with lesson 5 for Unit 5, Module B. The two vocabulary words that you've already learned for this lesson and reading is destiny and progress. Destiny means fate or future, right? So destiny can mean something that is bound to happen in the future. Progress means that you're moving forward or you're making changes, and usually when you're making progress, it's for the better. Let's look at our conventions for today's lesson. I will be able to use prepositional phrases, and our writing objective is I will be able to identify and describe connections. Our conventions mini lesson on prepositional phrases. Remember that a prepositional phrase has a preposition and the object of the preposition. By adding a prepositional phrase to a simple sentence, writers can provide more details and make their sentences more interesting to read. Let's look at our examples. This simple sentence says, they had to work. With the prepositional phrase, they had to work on family farms. Our simple sentence, John McWilliams headed west. With our prepositional phrase, John McWilliams headed west in search of gold. Adding prepositional phrases can provide more details about how, why, or where people do things. These added phrases provide details that answer questions such as where children worked and why John McWilliams headed west. In your online writing journal, under Lesson 5, you're going to expand the simple sentences below by adding prepositional phrases. I will help you with number 1, and then I would like for you to do number 2 on your own. Number 1 says, a person just had to be 21 years old. And I'll read number 2 to you. Ruth started teaching school. Okay, so I would like for you to retype the whole sentence. Okay, remember we always start with a capital. So a person just had to be 21 years old to own his or her own land. Okay, so we've expanded this simple sentence by adding the prepositional phrase to own his or her own land. Now I want you to see if you can do number 2 on your own. I want you to look at when Ruth started teaching school. Narrative writing. Identify strong conclusions. A good piece of writing ends with a strong conclusion that summarizes what has been discussed so far. A strong conclusion leaves the reader with a final understanding of the points the author has made in the text. The last section of Pioneers to the West, especially the text on page 27 under the heading Building a New Country, serves as a conclusion for this book. The boxes on the map on pages 28 to 29 work as conclusions for the individual stories of each of the pioneer children discussed in the book. During reading, readers can better understand a text conclusion by keeping some questions in mind as they read. What people, events, or ideas from earlier in the text are mentioned again in the conclusion? What claims does the author make about these people, events, or ideas? How do these claims relate to points the author made before about them? And finally, after reading the conclusion, how do I understand the importance of these people, events, or ideas better? A conclusion should help readers understand the ideas the writer was trying to communicate and why the text is important. When you write narrative stories, you can end with a strong conclusion that summarizes the events in your narratives. Let's look at the following models from page 27 and page 29. As the stories in this book have shown, life was harder for U.S. pioneer children. They had to work as hard as the adults. Many died young, but those who lived could be proud that they helped build a country. And then a section about Laura Ingalls Wilder. The Ingalls family lived in many different places throughout the Midwest. As an adult, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about their experiences in books that are still popular today. Okay, so for the first one, the writer reminds the reader about the main topic of the book, stories of pioneer children. Then the writer connects this topic with the other main idea of the book, how people's actions help the country grow. Okay, about Laura Ingalls Wilder. First, the writer summarizes the events that happened to the Ingalls family. They moved around many times. Then the writer explains why Laura's experiences were worth including in this book. They inspired a series of famous books. Identify and describe connections. So we will work together to rewrite one of the conclusions about the young pioneers from pages 28 to 29 as a narrative. The new conclusion will include more details. Even though a writer can strengthen a conclusion by adding more descriptions, the writer must be sure that any information included relates back to the rest of the story. So I'm going to reread these pages to you. So this is mapping migration. Most settlers followed one of these trails to the west. Traveling a well-known path made the trip safer. This map also shows the route American Indians in the east followed to the reservations in the west. This path was called the Trail of Tears. John McWilliams. John McWilliams headed west to California in search of gold. While he didn't make his fortune, he had plenty of adventures. George Staples. George Staples' journey to the Salt Lake Valley was interrupted by the time he spent living with the Sioux. He remained friendly with local Indian tribes for the rest of his life. Ruth Chrisman. The Homestead Act allowed women such as Ruth Chrisman and her sisters to own their own land on the American prairie. These women rode horses and battled the elements right alongside men. And finally, Laura Ingalls Wilder. The Ingalls family lived in many different places throughout the Midwest. As an adult, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about their experiences in books that are still popular today. Okay, so if we were to pick John McWilliams to write about, let's look at forming and organizing the conclusion of a narrative. As I look for details about the young pioneer John McWilliams, I have to go back in the text. There is a section that describes John Williams' young adulthood when he decided to head out west to California. I'm going to reread these pages and see what details will be useful in a conclusion about him. Okay, so we would go back to the text and find that section, and then after we read about that, we would write the conclusion of a narrative based on the text. So when the gold rush started, John McWilliams headed west. He became one of the 49ers who traveled to California in search of gold. While he didn't make his fortune there, he had plenty of adventures. By raising a family in St. Louis, he became one of the many settlers who helped the United States grow. Okay, so under Lesson 5 in your online writing journal, you're going to identify and describe a connection between the Homestead Act and another event in Pioneers to the West. Okay, I'm going to see if you can do this one independently on your own. If you need any help, I'm here on Google Classroom or you may email me. Thank you.